want to did you want to say hello?
I will, and as the saying goes, right back at you, Dr. Cooks. It's my really great pleasure to welcome our college community to what I believe is our final presentation in this series for this academic year. Could be missing something here, but I hope that's correct. In partnership with the Black Education Association, or BEA. The series has brought expertise and recent scholarship to us on the crucial issues of education and equity for Black student success, and by extension, of course, the success of all students from communities of color and beyond. Dr. Yolanda Sealy Ruiz, who I had a chance to just meet a little bit heading into the meeting, welcome, warm welcome to Chabot. We're honored to learn from you. A special note of appreciation to our intrepid BEA president and dean of I want to say English, and that's not what I mean.
Language arts, you're good.
It's that time of the semester, language arts, Dr. Jamal Cooks. Yeah, this has been wonderful, and we're excited about having our honored speaker.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask Dr. Yolanda to go ahead and turn on her her video. She's waving at everyone, so you can give her a thumbs up, a clap, and all those good things. And so this is kind of a reunion of sorts. I haven't been able. I'm an active member with NCTE, the National Council for Teachers of English, and Dr. Yolanda and I have been great colleagues through this process, whether that's in talking about theory and working with graduate students and professionally reviewing papers and all those things. And so I thought that her perspective, she's actually in New York, right? I should give you this context. She's in New York. She actually was ready and prepared to work with us at 3 o'clock her time. So I appreciate her being on the spot for that. And since she was, from the time that she was ready to present to us till now, she's already taught a class where she was talking about ethnography and case studies. And so there are very, very few people who I think burn the midnight oil and burn the candle at both ends and the middle as I do. But my academic sister right here definitely does that. And to provide her introduction, I'm going to surprise her, unless she figured it out by now, with an introduction by another academic family member in her own right, who is been a teacher of the year. She's been written up nationally. She's a scholar, she's a practitioner, and hopefully one day we'll be able to hear from her to speak to us as well. So we are making a national connection between New York, Hayward, and the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I'm going to introduce, that's why I wanted the camera on. I'm going to let Dr. Tanya Perry introduce Dr. Yolanda.
It is my pleasure to be here today, Dr. Cooks. And I must say to President Sperling, it takes a great leader to put other great leaders in place. And Dr. Cooks is that. And so that is a testament to your leadership. And to you, Dr. Cooks, it takes a great leader to be able to put together a program that inspires and challenges other people. And for you to bring in other people who can challenge us to think. So to you, Dean Cooks, congratulations. And I say to Dr. Yolanda, Dr. Yoli, my sister, my friend, my encourager, I cannot think of a better person to tonight, at least in your time, to to be present, to inform, to encourage, and to spread love and sunshine to this esteemed group of faculty and staff. So let me just say, this is my sister, my colleague, my encourager, and my friend. This is Dr. Yolanda Sealy Ruiz. I first met Yolanda when we were at an NCTE conference many years ago. And her spirit was so open and welcoming. She came up to me and she said, "I admire you." And I was so convinced she had me confused. I spent the entire conference going, "I'm sorry, Dr. Yolanda, you must have the wrong person. It is you who inspires me." And so the entire conference, I kept saying, "It can't be me, because it is always you who spreads the sunshine." We laugh about it today, but I wanted you to know that when she's around, as you will see, the room is different. The room is not the same when Yoli is present. It's like walking with sun rays. You can't catch them, but you feel them. You see them and you feel the warmth. And you know, when you feel the sun, you're better, you're stronger, you know it's there, even though you can't catch it. And so Dr. Sealy Ruiz is an associate professor at Columbia University, Teachers College. She's a poet, she's a scholar, she's a researcher. I call her a humanizing being, a creative spirit, a lover of humanity. That is my friend, my colleague, that I love and hold dearly. And so tonight, you will see what it's like to walk with sunshine. This is my colleague who will present to you tonight. I love you, Yoli. You are amazing. And tonight you will continue to share and show your sunshine. Once again, President Sperling, Dean Cooks, thank you for this opportunity for me to share my friend with your colleagues at Chabot College. Dr. Yoli,
Oh my goodness.
turn it on, young lady.
I will only say thank you for now, because I think, Dr. Perry, if I say something else, the tears are going to be uncontrollable and you'll be witnessing an ugly cry. And Dean Cooks, you didn't invite me here for the ugly cries. Tanya, I love you. I respect you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that so much. Thank you, community, for inviting me here. I'm going to start. Wow. Woo. Woo. Yes. I'm going to start right away. I was talking to Dean Cooks. We had 1 or 2 conversations and learned a bit about Chabot College and all that you're doing there, the beautiful work that's happening. And I want to thank him because he really helped me to focus the talk today, you literally using his words, which is words that I like to use as well. So let me share the screen. You will see my screen. Let's see, just give me a little bit of grace as you look at my desktop. But here we go. He was talking about the words culture, love, and hope. And I have to say that is what drives me in the work that I do. And I thought about a recent course that I taught with a doctoral student who's now Dr. Shamari Reed, which I'm going to talk a little bit about the class. And there's actually 2 students here I recognize from that class, Black Lives Matter. And I thought about the impact that, quite frankly, that Dr. Dean Cooks has on so many people. These are young people that he works with as a coach. Folks in the academy, much like myself, I definitely won't tell the story of first meeting him because I will cry, but I was no one to be recognized, and he stood by an elevator and talked to me for 45 minutes. That's how I met him. That's how I remember him. And so from the very beginning, he, as well as Dr. Perry, has always shown me love, always represented to me this need for hope and this a way of showing hope in the academy, and certainly recognizing me from my culture, from my full being. And so I think a lot about John Lewis, and not to put you on the spot, Dean Cooks, but I think about the role that John Lewis played in the lives of so many. It's kind of the behind the scenes person, and he was often behind the scenes for Barack Obama and so many others. And so I put all of that together and came up with this talk today: good and necessary trouble for higher education, culture, love, and hope. And I want to begin always, as I do, by paying homage and taking a moment of silence for the land on which I stand. This place where I am on Turtle Island, also known as Manhattan, specifically in Harlem, was inhabited by 14 different First Nations tribes. But where I am, where Columbia University sits, it was predominated by the Wappinger and Lenape peoples. So of course, it is my hope that as we perform land acknowledgements throughout the world, that we truly acknowledge our First Nations brothers and sisters, particularly in higher education, by having more of them present and helping more of them realize the dreams of their foremothers and forefathers. So I'd just like to take a moment of silence to acknowledge them. Thank you for that. And John Lewis said, when historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, our time, let them say that it was our generation, I'm going to paraphrase, who laid down the heavy burden of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. And when I think about the work of the Black Student Network and many of the organizations at Chabot College, it is really doing this, of putting down the heavy burden of hate, of looking at the full humanity of all students, and being the ones perhaps that John Lewis will talk about to say, yes, we made a difference in our generation. And so as we think about culture and higher education and making a difference, I want to share this because this is new and this is pretty powerful. No, African-American studies departments are not new. But what is new is at Michigan State University, this new department that focuses on Black feminisms with an S, Black genders with an S, and Black sexualities with an S. So this is taking the beautiful work of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who introduced intersectionality to all of us, and really seeing the multiple cultures, the multiple ways of being and knowing, specifically within the Black community, and saying it is important enough that we will have a new department to focus on this. So Michigan State University is not alone in trying to grapple with what we call in K through 12 culturally relevant, culturally responsive, culturally sustaining pedagogies and curriculum. Here, my own Columbia University says we have to begin to look at our syllabi. We have to begin to look at who we're asking our students to read and diversify that, to have more of multiple cultural lenses in terms of who our students, our emerging scholars are interacting with. And then the Chronicle, which is somewhat known as the Bible, right, of higher ed, is beginning to take up, this language of change as well. In this article, 2/15/2021, talking about, and this was after, of course, the murder of George Floyd and the egregious murders that we've been seeing, that what is the role of the college? How are we in higher education going to remain relevant if we do not decolonize our syllabi, if we do not center experiences of students of color and hear from them how this might be a traumatic experience for them to pass through our halls? How do we take up, this article asks, this idea of being the anti-racist college, which is about truth, equity and justice for everyone. And so at this point, it is about how do we remain relevant? And it is always, for me, the young people, and particularly young people in higher ed. And this is why I also hang around high school students who remind us of our promise, who remind us of who we can possibly be. And so I just want to use this time, the next few moments, to share with you my good and necessary trouble, my kind of journey into higher education and trying to be the one in my generation that takes down the heavy burden of hate, that tries to create spaces for my students, all my students, and particularly my students of color, for whom there are very few in Teachers College, Columbia University, to engage with who they are, to feel like these spaces belong to them. And so it starts with an evolution of my idea. I was a research associate with Columbia. I was on a 18-month contract, and I was to teach a course that summer. This is 2008. And at the end of my course, of course, I was teaching the diversity course. I wanted to build my students' racial literacy. I didn't have the language then, but I had it a couple of years later. And many of my students had gotten very upset with me because of the way I pushed them to be their better selves, past racist ideology, past sexist and religious bias ideology. And I wrote a letter to them, as I often do at the end of class. And I realized that the letter had been accessed 107 times, but only 3 students responded. Well, it happened one day. New York City is huge, but it's also very small. I bumped into one of my students on the train who told me how upset most of the class was with me, that they felt called out by me. And that was the beginning of this idea of having racial literacy roundtables. I invited the 3 students, one who identified as Korean American, and 2 females who identified as white American. And we began the racial literacy roundtables. So the first one was conducted by my Korean American student, James, and he invited his middle schoolers and the 3 of us and maybe 4 other people who wandered into the room that day. But since then, the racial literacy roundtables is going into its 12th year. It has been held up by the president. It is funded by the provost. And this particular picture with Dr. Cesar Cruz, who runs the Homies Improvement, an incredible organization in LA that encourages former gang members to become educators. This was the first time we burned sage at Teachers College. I was very nervous, y'all. I thought the smoke alarms were going to go off. But there was a clearing to make space for ancestors. And people wrote letters to their ancestors. And it was from all walks of life. And people cried and people shared. And this is the legacy that I've been trying to, this is the good and necessary trouble I've been trying to get into at TC. These are some other flyers where we talk more, of course, than about race. We talk about sexuality. We talk about, in this case, masculinity, seeing and hearing multiple perspectives, our multiracial students who often go under the radar or ignored. And Esther Ojito, a former student who is a brilliant scholar in her own right, she does work around what the body teaches. She looks into the somatic experiences that students have when they're going through particular institutions, right? And then it grew into what I call the Racial Literacy Lecture Series, which is really all performances. And so these are the 3 of the 4 experiences, one man, one woman shows. The one in the middle, Funny Not Funny. These are 2 educators who are also stand-up comedians. And they came and they talked about racism in education through a comedic lens. And then racism and homelessness, having 2 friends of mine who have various disabilities and talking about the connection between people with disabilities and homelessness, and particularly children, and how that impacts their schooling. And this, I would have to say, I'm most grateful for. And one of my students, Diana Liu, I think is here on the line. And she's part of what we're trying to build with Dr. Judy Yu and Michael Cho, what we're calling Black and Asian or Black and Gold solidarity. We know what white supremacy has created in terms of tensions between Black and Asian communities over time. But we also know historically, dating all the way back to 1869 with Ida B. Wells, that there has been Black and Asian solidarity. And so with Dr. Judy Yu, just submitted a Spencer Grant today that we're trying to hold a conference where we're inviting our colleagues from all over the world to engage in conversation on Black and Gold solidarity. And so I've written about this, certainly. This is one particular article. So it evolved from an article into a theory. And so this is my theory of racial literacy development, of which critical love, which I'll be talking a little bit more about in a few moments, is the foundation of this model for me and the work that I seek to do. I do work with teachers and superintendents around the country. And so because of that work, it's led me to create professional learning experiences around each of these components. And so this evolution of an idea that started from what I considered was a failure in my teaching in the summer of 2008 has grown into roundtables, lecture series. I'll share a little bit about healing circles, a theory, articles, and this book, which I got in the mail 2 days ago. And I'm so grateful to have authored it with Dr. Deetra Price Dennis, who's also a very dear friend of Dr. Tanya Perry and Dean Cooks. And we want our teachers to get it right. We want our teachers also to understand that remote learning did not just happen with children last March when the pandemic hit, that most children, young children, live their lives online. It is also where they seek to find belonging and love. And so archaeology of the self, what I want to share with all of you is really the way that we move this work forward of cultural understanding, of love, and of hope. Because we first have to do the work to understand what prevents us from being open to the cultures of others, from being open to loving children or other people as though they're our own family members, and to be open to having hope for our world, even in the most broken times that we are witnessing. And so again, archaeology of the self, each of these components not only are their own professional learning experiences, but other experiences have grown out of this. So my former student, who's now a brilliant scholar in his own right, who works around race and mindfulness, Dr. Angela Costa and I began hosting archaeology of self intensives, inviting people from all over the world to do the deep work of the self-excavation around our biases, around the beliefs and stereotypical thinking that prevent us from being fully human with each other. And this was a series, we did 4 in total. And these were the last 2 that we finished in April. And the most beautiful part is we had one participant who woke up at 3 a.m. in the morning because she was in Australia and attended every single institute, all 4 of them. And these are other ways that archaeology of the self from my work, my theory, has continued. I'm grateful to have spoken to all 100 Berkeley faculty in the College of Education about decolonizing their syllabus, taking up what the Columbia Spectator article began to talk about. And I worked with their graduate instructors as well as faculty from engineering, from biology, from mathematics, and from the humanities as well. The 400 years, contemplating 400 years of inequality is the work of Dr. Angela Costa, who invited me into facilitating a 400-year timeline of having us look at this history that we have to reckon with towards a space of healing, right? Collective healing and individual healing. And then being in conversation with alumni, Fanchon Cox, who is really doing the work of culture, hope, and love in Hollywood, as she is the author of the writer. It's a writer that Hollywood directors need to pay attention to, that before they cast a movie, that they make sure that people in front of the screen and behind the screen are people of color. So that was something she penned with Frances McDormand. And she's really making waves in Hollywood. So for me to be in conversation with her has been amazing. And so the next couple of minutes, I want to show you how I continue the good and necessary trouble, being inspired by my former doctoral student, Shamari Reed and Toni Morrison. And she said that as though our lives have no meaning and no depth outside of the white gaze, and I have spent my entire writing life trying to make sure that the white gaze was not the dominant one in any of my books, we decided that we would design a course, the first ever course at Teachers College, Columbia University, entitled Black Lives Matter. And we did so through a multimodal exploration where we invited our students to take up this question: what becomes possible with regard to Black liberation when we center the Black gaze? And I think one of the most powerful parts of the course is that we had Asian students, white students, Black students, mixed race students, across sexuality, across religions, answering this question. And I want to pose these questions to each of us because, you know, we have a shared humanity. And if a segment of our humanity, our human family, is not being treated right, then I don't think any of us should be able to rest with ease, particularly those of us in schools and in higher education. So they all took up this question. And they articulated their journey through what we call the unfinal projects, some of the most creative, amazing work. When you talk about hope and you talk about love and, dare I say, joy in higher education, was for me to be the facilitator of this course and the beautiful work that they produced as a result of answering that question: what does it mean to center the Black gaze and to find their role in the movement for Black lives? And these were our course themes. This is how Shamari, Dr. Reed, and I framed the course. And these are the books that we read: Black Gaze, Black Genius, Black Joy, Black Love, Black Imagination, and Black Healing. And so we got together for 14 weeks, 15 weeks, some weeks were asynchronously, to look at media that specifically spoke to these 5 themes. And they had to answer the question: what does Black Lives Matter mean to you? That was one of the many things we did in the course together. And I want to say that I had to ask myself this question as I accept invitations to do talks. Am I centering my life as a Black person? And are Black lives mattering in my research? Is love mattering in my research? And so these are examples of what I've done, from poetry readings to panels to podcasts, on how I have centered love and centered the Black gaze. These are other spaces, being in community with Dr. Bettina Love and my best friend Godi Muhammad, Dr. Chris Emdin, writer Roxane Gay, poet Mahogany Brown, talking deeply about anti-Black racism within Black communities and communities of color, having these honest conversations to engage us in, you know, pushing past the silence so that we can really come together in our full humanity. And my former student, who's now a doctor in her own right, Dr. Keisha Woods, inviting me to even think more deeply about racial literacy and calling it Black racial literacy. So I continue to learn, I continue to deepen what I'm understanding about this theory of racial literacy development that I'm writing under. And so this is the new image. You saw it's not really a new image, you saw the pyramid, but this is an image, thank you, Dr. Angela Costa, to specifically focus on the self, the archaeology of ourselves, and doing this work of cultural understanding, doing this work of love, and this work of hope. We have to know what blocks us from moving forward in our teaching in this way, in our administrating in this way. And I want to bring one of my students into the room. HW said that the archaeology of the self is a spiritual and healing dig, discovery, self, she calls it evacuation, that can manifest love inward and outward. And this is an example, y'all. And I just want to say that, you know, Love from the Vortex is published by a doctoral student. It's also a team of us, all women, one of us non-binary in terms of our sexuality, but being guided by feminist principles that everyone shares in this project. That's how we entered it, and that's how we end it. And so Team Vortex, they really co-constructed this with me. I handed over my poems, which were deeply personal, very vulnerable, because it's difficult for me to ask my students to do something I am not willing to do. So if I'm asking them to move forward in life and in the classroom with humility and with vulnerability, I think I have to, at minimum, be a model of that. And so this is an artifact, my artifact around my archaeological dig on love and intimacy. And like with the theory of racial literacy development, my mind expands, and it's the gift that keeps giving. And so I'm grateful to have produced an Audible album set to original music and sound, working with a Latinx Grammy-nominated artist. I am so grateful that I woke up one morning and I said, you know, maybe I should talk to people about how the book has impacted them. And the next thing I knew, I had 20 sessions on IG of Fall into the Vortex with Yoli. And what I am most grateful for is a teacher of 22 years began to read the book with her high school students and 2 of her former high school students. And they decided that they want to write a curriculum. And so Dr. Tanya and Dean Cooks, I am trying to be in conversation with the National Council of Teachers of English, one of our home organizations, to see if they will publish and distribute this curriculum written by students, for students, centering love. Another of my students, BM, said, engaging in archaeology of the self is a process that requires us to be gentle and delicate with ourselves. As we dig through our histories, much like professional archaeologists use tools in order to excavate delicate historical artifacts with care. Now, being gentle with oneself does not mean we turn away from hard truths, from misbeliefs, biases, trauma, or pain, but instead we look deeply within from a place of radical self-love. The process also requires a keen eye for detail, complexity, nuance, contradiction, and truths, while examining our beliefs, attitudes, and understandings. And while self-archaeology is very much about making meaning from the past, including our personal and collective histories, it is also very much concerned with our ability to be fully present in this moment and with sustaining futures that are full of possibility, hope, and joy. And that has led me to teach. And I've been teaching for 29 years, and I cannot imagine doing anything else. Although I did spend 13 years in corporate America, I needed to breathe. And so I started teaching at night. And for me, teaching is an act of love. We teach who we are. We teach our values, our character, our identity shows up wherever we show up. And the act of teaching requires love and is a loving act. Love requires vulnerability and healing. And so our teaching is a manifestation of who we are in the process of healing and caring for ourselves and others. That's from my friend and brother, Richard Haynes, who is the director of the New York City Men Teach program in New York. I have been working with New York City Men Teach for 6 years now, designing professional development around racial literacy and self-care and self-love for teachers. And so this idea of critical love, as I mentioned a moment ago, is the foundation of my racial literacy development theory. It is the foundation of all that I seek to do, not just in my private life, but also in my professional life. And I want to offer this to Chabot College. Do we critically love our students in the communities they come from? Is there a profound and ethical commitment to caring for them, caring for this community and our students within this community? Is there a profound and ethical commitment to them? And if the answer is yes, beautiful. If there are spaces that we need to improve, and likely all institutions need to improve in this area, then I say let's do the work and let's approach it with humility. Let's approach it being deeply reflective. Let's have some historical literacy, some understanding of the history of the college, who's has attended the college, who has been the leaders of the college historically. so that we can do an archaeology of the institution to know where the deep work towards equity, towards cultural understanding, towards hope and love need to happen. And then, of course, when we come across those policies that are tools of harm instead of tools of help, those practices, those beliefs that interrupt full humanity, then we must interrupt those things. We must say this policy no more and have the courage to do so. At least this is my hope with the racial literacy development model. And so I have an essential question that I'm hoping, I'm almost coming to the end so that we can have time to speak, but I'm hoping that you'll be willing to take up this essential question. How can critical love, this love, I should say, let me go back, I want to say who I'm inspired by for critical love. I'm inspired by Bell Hooks. I'm inspired by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm inspired by Paulo Freire, that links love with liberation. So this is not the amorous love, although we need that as well, but this is love that seeks to liberate ourselves, that we love ourselves enough, that we liberate ourselves from these deep beliefs and biases and stereotypical notions that we hold, and that we also seek to liberate the students, the people in our lives that may be impacted most by deficit narratives that society has written for them. So it is an act and a love of freedom and of liberation. So how can we critically love our students? How can critical love penetrate this love of liberation, this profound ethical commitment? How can it penetrate the work that you all do at Chabot College? And for those of you who are students on the line, how do you know when you're feeling that critical love from your college, from your professors, from your administrators? And our love must be so evident, like literally on fire. The ethos of Chabot College, of TC, which I still have hope for TC, is that anyone who walks through the doors knows that they will be, as a student, they will be held there. They will be taken care of, that they will be loved, that is the ethos of the organization, of the institution. And so this is a poem that I'd like to quickly read. It comes from Love from the Vortex, because I don't just talk about the 6 people that I've chosen to love and who loved me back over 30 years. I also talk about other things I love, like my South Bronx neighborhood, my love of justice, my love of equity. And so this poem, Just Us, I'd like to encourage all of you with it. Here is my invitation for you to bend towards justice. My arc of self bends in favor of love. Asking hard questions and waiting for answers that don't offer conclusions, just more wonderings about how to live a life worthy of the children who come after us. And so, our love for each other must be costly, and it must be fruitful. And it must be a love that bears fruit. This is a video. Dean Cooks, if you do not hear it or see it, please let me know, and I'll do my best to troubleshoot.
Okay.
So Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us that power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. That's something to take in, right? And Amanda Gorman, this brilliant, brilliant young sister poet, said that there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And James Baldwin reminds us that the sea rises and the light fails. Lovers cling to each other and children cling to us. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the light goes out. Culture, love, and hope. I just want to remind us that we are the ones, as June Jordan said, that we've been waiting for, and that the education system will not automatically change. We have to change the education system. Those of us in higher education, we have to center, I believe, culture, we have to center love, and we have to center hope. And in fact, if we can center culture and love, perhaps that'll give us hope for our system. So I'm going to come off of screen share, but I want to offer these probes. You don't have to use them, but just perhaps as a way to enter our next, I guess, 25 or 30 minutes together. What struck you by what I shared? What are you now wondering? Where's your thinking at this moment? What connections were you able to make, or are you making between some of the things I shared and some things that you know and some things you've experienced? And how would you like to continue the conversation? Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Let's first of all acknowledge that Dr. Yolanda just absolutely blessed the silence. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And I think in this time of COVID and craziness and not being able to connect with each other, you know, in person and those kinds of things, and the work that and stress that all of us have been under, your message was heard and received and uplifting in more ways than one. So thank you for that. The chat is now open. If you have questions that you'd like to pose, if you'd like to ask your question, you can feel free to raise the hand and then you can unmute. Just as a time check, I know we had our own love fest in the very beginning, but it's 3:54, and I know some folks have a 4 o'clock meeting. If you do, this would be fine. If you needed to go ahead and leave now, that would be completely fine. And those that are willing to stay, please feel free to stay and let's have a conversation, because it's not every day that we have just an open forum and time to be able to bounce ideas off and talk about how we put these ideas of culture, love, and hope and move them from theory into practice. So with that, are there questions in the chat? And I apologize, I put something in the chat referencing coaching in high schools, and Yolanda, with your student Diana,
Yes.
I didn't know she was from, she said she lived near Chabot. So that's what I was letting her know, is that, that there's more connections there, more connections.
Beautiful. We are connected in so many ways.
Absolutely. Well, I'll go ahead and start, just so that as questions begin to come, you know, and I think you really started getting to it in your conclusion. You know, what I want to make sure of is that no one on the screen, in the proverbial room, says, "Oh, well, we got this person from New York. What do they know about higher education? What do they know about what we do and how we do?" And so, right, and Yolanda, we know that a lot of our Black and brown folks are disproportionately impacted folks. formerly incarcerated. There's a whole lot of different groups that end up and sometimes I think it may have been some folks would end up at community college, but I think now folks are making a conscious decision to attend a community college for a variety of different reasons. And so although you are at the 4-year and at your particular school, I guess I'm saying what can you leave with us as nuggets with from the community college ranks in terms of what we need to do in terms of curriculum, teaching in our classrooms?
Thank you, Dean Cooks. First, I want to say my first home was Kingsborough Community College. And I would still be at Kingsborough Community College, but I became pregnant with my daughter. A little bit more information than you need, but I had experienced, it's already in the book. I experienced multiple miscarriages. And so by the time it looked like I was going to have this child, and I did have the child, I was 90 minutes away from her each way. So I was a nervous first-time mother. That actually led me to leaving Kingsborough Community College, where I was very happy at Kingsborough Community College, because it's something about community college students, what you said, Dean Cooks, it's a deliberate choice. And my community college students, they came with a different kind of orientation towards education, because for many of them, their education had been interrupted. For many of them, they came with a different kind of drive and a hunger that perhaps I didn't see when I was teaching at NYU when I was a PhD student. So I first want to say that had it not been, and I'm grateful for the shift because I needed to be closer to my daughter who's now 16, but my heart began with actually a reentry college, and then my first tenure track position was Kingsborough Community College. And so one thing I will say, yes, community college has its own culture. Some of the students who choose to go there for various reasons have had some things happen to them that perhaps other students have not experienced. But one thing I do know, having taught at community and for a year, is that there exists in this society that we all live in that's deeply entrenched in inequality. That's one thing I do know. And so even though the cultures might be different from the institutions, there are certain through lines that run all the way through. And you can bet that a student of color is going to experience it, whether he, she, they are at the community college or at the 4-year college. So this is the honest conversations that we have to have. And I think if we say something like, oh, you don't know us, we're so unique. Yes, we're all unique in different ways, but there's certain things that play out across the board for centuries now, right? And certainly since 1954 with so-called integration. So we have to be honest about that, I think. And yes, what we do well or what you do well as a community college, beautiful. But also you have to be honest that you do have some things in common with some of these 4-year universities that may be harming students too. So what I would say, and the communities and the communities of practice that I've been part of, I would say the same thing to TC. Listen to your students. Pull them in a real way on conversations around pedagogy, around curriculum, around what they need to know, in addition to what you feel from an academic standpoint of a college that they need to know. And particularly with community colleges, where I feel like sometimes my community college students are disrespected for their wisdom and knowledge, make that space even more open for them, because they often come with different experiences that the university, the colleges need to pay attention to. So I would say, listen to them in ways perhaps that you have not been listening to them. And when they share something, let it be visibly impacted and seen in your practices, in your policies, in your curriculum. That's me freedom dreaming.
That's what we're here for. While we're waiting for the other questions, Yvette Blair put in the chat, she appreciates your scholarship, compassion, and voice in the narrative of higher education. She met you years ago at the Hurston Writers.
Is this Pastor Yvette Blair, who's an amazing pastor? I love you, sister. Please come off of mic. Pastor Yvette Blair. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That is my sister.
in
Hello, how are you?
Y'all
This
gonna make
is
me cry today for
wonderful.
sure. Oh my goodness. Pastor Blair, please, please bless us, please.
Oh my goodness. I saw where you were posting that you were doing this talk today, and I cleared my schedule so I could sit back and listen. And just your wisdom is just amazing. And though I am not in higher education, I'm in pastoral ministry. I just think about the inroads of how what you shared impacts and informs ways that I can even look at the sacred text based on what you shared. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I love you, Pastor. Thank you.
Love you too.
I'm sorry, Dean Cooks. I just got really excited in that
No.
moment.
We want you to stay right where you are, right where you are. Talk more about hope a little bit, right? Talk a little more about hope. And part of what you and I were talking about the her series, and we were talking about hope, and I think what's interesting to me about hope is that there's more than just two sides of the coin, right? I think it's more like a Rubik's cube kind of, right? Like there's a variety of different ways, because I think there's one extreme where you think that hope is where you think hope may be powerful, that you think hope may be inspiring, where you think hope may be that light at the end of the tunnel. But I think there's another space kind of at the polar opposite end of that sometimes we lose hope because we continually feel like we're banging our head either against the wall, the ceiling, the floor, that it's not working out well. And so I think that there's a variety of different ways of looking at hope. And so particularly with higher education, with budget limitations, with we have having to have a number of students at the with enrollment, lack of resources, trying to shift culture, all these kinds of different things. How do you think? What's a way that you think that as higher ed educators and administrators and teachers that we can think about how to place hope and center hope?
So first, I'm going to call on. It's so appropriate that Pastor Yvette Blair just spoke, because the first thing I think of, is Hebrews 11, right? And I'm thinking about the faith that we have to have in our students. I'm thinking about the faith.
Yolanda, don't hurt them. Don't hurt them.
Oh no, the faith we have to have in humanity. I just want to say that faith is being sure of what we hope for, right? And certain of what we don't see. So that's the first thing I thought about, Dean Cooks. And then I thought about, what did you say? Like, how do we hold on to hope? So first and foremost, you have to have a belief in humanity, right? That even when we see all that we are seeing, we have seen in our past through our ancestors, through those who have given their lives for the hope of a new day. We have examples of people believing in hope at the most difficult times in history. So what is it about us that we say we cannot also continue on that timeline and have hope? Because education is the business of hope. So if we lose hope in education specifically, then I'm sorry for our nation. Because we are educating those who are going to go on to be doctors, lawyers, policymakers. So if we don't have that as an ethos, and that the people who are coming through our classrooms, that we have the hope that we can kind of change their hearts and their mindsets for them to go on and change the world in a different way, then really it's a sad moment. Education is hope, at least for me it is. And so the other thing I wanted to do is freedom dreaming. Robin D.G. Kelley, his book, Freedom Dreams, right? Dr. Bettina Love, who takes up freedom dreaming in her book about abolitionist teaching. We have to be able to have the courage to believe what we do not see. Harriet Tubman did that. And here's Yolanda Sealy Ruiz. Harriet might have not even envisioned me here talking to the illustrious group here as a professor. So we have to have hope. If we lose hope, we may as well be dead.
There it is. There it is. Other folks, other questions? Other questions?
Comments,
They,
thoughts,
they
feelings.
just like hearing you talk.
No, no, I would love to hear what's your thinking now? What are you feeling? What's resonating with you? Is there anything that I shared that maybe, has touched you in some way, or challenged you, or inspired you, or upset you, or frustrated you? I'm open to that as well. And if I've harmed you in any way, I'm ready to apologize for that. That's never my intention. But we react to these things in different ways depending on our positionality, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm open to
So
whatever
I
you're feeling.
just
Yeah.
want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. I am really touched just to see incorporating love, hope, and culture into everything that we do, because you are so correct that if we don't have those things, then as educators, where are we actually going? And so
Mm.
I'm here sitting here, and it's just really wonderful to just hear from you and hear all of the things that you're doing, especially when it comes to one of the things that really touched me, since I'm a STEM dean, is the culturally relevant pedagogy that you've done with STEM faculty, because I know sometimes that's really hard to kind of incorporate and fuse some of those things into their course. And so
Yes.
I would say, yeah, that for me has, yeah, highlight of this afternoon. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing that. And this is the hope, right? The more that we have these conversations, the hope continues, right? That more people will listen and take it up and perhaps look at their syllabi and decolonize and change. And, we make that change incrementally. Thank you, Dean. I appreciate your comment.
Absolutely. There was a question that came in the chat that many students at community colleges are non-traditional students, i.e.
Yes.
adult, reentry, working parents. What are some practices and methods of teaching that validate their lived experiences and knowledge?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And I think we have to turn to probably adult education theory for that, in terms of when we talk about a theoretical grounding, particularly androgyny and andragogy. I'm sorry, not androgyny. I'm sorry, andragogy. I'm sorry.
Hey, I was going to correct you. I was going to correct you on that one.
I saw,
Yeah.
brother, you were standing right by to help me. But
I got
really, what we know about adults through the beautiful work of Juanita, I could rattle off Juanita Johnson Bailey, Ed Gordon, Elizabeth
Yeah.
Tisdale, and so forth, is that adults want to use their lived experiences in the classroom. They actually want that to be central to the curriculum. In part, for those who are returning, who have been away from school. I taught at the College of New Rochelle for 9 years. That was a reentry college. So I went from reentry to community college for almost like 13 years of my 29 years of teaching. And so they want to feel like they have a space in the classroom. They want to show that they have some wisdom, that they have something that they can contribute. And so being able to begin with their lived experiences is a win-win. And adult education is a beautiful field for really understanding how we should move forward with culturally relevant pedagogy and curriculum that is adult-centered in our classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
I have a question.
Dr. Perry, go ahead.
Dr. Perry, I got myself together now. I'm not crying so much. I can tell you how grateful I am for you and your wisdom and your love. Thank you so much for that introduction.
You are so welcome. And, I love you, sis.
I love you too.
Can you give us maybe 3 practical things that we can do to show love in our classrooms? So when you think about how you may have seen love not shown in some ways, what are 3 ways in which you would encourage us to think about how can we show love to our students and to the families and communities that we teach and honor them. And particularly in a community college setting, what might be ways in which we may not even consider that we may not be showing love, right?
Mm.
What are some things that we really might want to think about and incorporate, even thinking about the summer term, and moving into the rest of the year? And it can be pandemic related, but it may not be pandemic related, right?
Mhm.
But, what are some things that, if you said, Yoli says, if these 3 things would occur, this would certainly make our classrooms better for our students, what would that be?
Ooh. Well, the first 3 things that just came to mind, the first 2 might seem relatively simple, but you'll be surprised how much it doesn't happen. And the third one rarely happens, I think. The first is know the names of your students and pronounce them properly. Know the names of your students and pronounce them properly. Even if it takes you half of a semester, let them know that you're going to get it right. Number 2, check in with them. Like literally, how is your heart? How are you feeling? And like really, how are you coming into this space today? And create an environment that they can easily say, I feel upset, I feel depressed, I feel this, I feel that. Have them be seen in that space. And the third thing I would offer is to have them in some ways co-construct part of the course that you're teaching. So have their voice somewhere show up, and it could be in the way of you offering choice, if you will, for the type of project, but somehow have them co-present, somehow their voice, it needs to be more than just our voice in the classroom. So I would say names, checking in, and making sure that voice is present. That's just one of many, 3 simple ways that we can make sure that we're showing love. Because love is a sense of belonging, right? And also if we talk about critical love, what I'm talking about with liberation, there is a sense of freedom there that they're kind of moving around in the space, particularly when it comes to the curriculum. If they have the freedom to contribute to the curriculum, to the freedom to choose the topics that they want to focus and the type of project that they want to do. That's all linked to kind of academic liberation. It's about getting free. So they need to feel free in that environment.
Just a follow up to that, what do you say when people, and as scholars, we don't have time for that. That's touchy feely. That's not the academic part. I've got to get through this content and I don't have time necessarily for all that touchy feely stuff. What would you say to us, Doc?
Yeah, all right. We can still keep saying that. This is why you're seeing what in K through 12, everyone's now talking about social emotional learning, not just for kids, but also for adults, particularly post-pandemic, the trauma that adults and children have experienced and we're still experiencing. People are now, some folks are just now talking about social emotional learning. Those of us who really are about even social justice, we know that the human being has to be considered in that. And so therefore their social emotional learning makes a difference. So we can continue that bifurcation of saying, oh, that's soft teaching versus the hard sciences of it. And this is why we keep having students leave our institutions traumatized. Because we're not taking a moment to try to do something different. We're not looking at how that so-called objectivity that students in front of us are really kind of so sad and dying inside because we're so busy being objective and getting through everything on the syllabus and not realizing that we're teaching children and young people and adults and not just teaching concepts. So I would say, I would want that person to do a little bit more deep thinking. And that would be you insisting on that. What is that doing for you? And so when you think about what it's doing for you, then ask the question, is it serving the students well? What is it doing for them that you blitzkrieg through the entire syllabus and not make space for them to talk about how what they're learning is impacting them? Who's being serviced? Because after all, remember, our job is the job of a servant. As professors, as deans, we're serving communities. are we serving them best when we take that approach? That would be my question. And if the answer is yes for the person, I would just probably, knowing me, ask more questions. I would go into inquiry mode. And it would probably trace back to the way that they were taught and the way that they were conditioned in a doctoral program. We often exact harm on our students, the same harm that was exacted on us. That's why we need to kind of interrupt. So I think it goes much deeper than just saying I'm being objective. I think it's something deeper. I think it's fear related, of not getting too close to your students. Don't open up that space too much to know their stories. I can't really help them in the way that they may want. I think it's always something much deeper, and it's just in some ways easier to try to maintain this objectivity. But particularly post-pandemic, I think we have to rewrite that script. How do you think they would take that, Dr. Tanya? I don't know, they might want to kick me out their office after that, I'm not sure.
Maybe like some penicillin or something. They may not be ready for that.
They're not ready, Dean Cooks, they're not ready.
You know, let me ask you this, and I'm, you know, and just because we have a smaller group, I'm feeling inspired to ask this question. I think, you know, I think, well, for a lot of us that went on for graduate education, some of us may have been first generation, some of us may or may not have known what, you know, what to expect in graduate school. And one of the things I always talk about is that in graduate school, it was when it was an epiphany for me when I realized that the school was paying me to think about how to make changes in the educational system that impacted people that look like me.
Mm.
And when I realized that, I began to embrace that positionality. And so I'm looking around the room, and there are some folks there. We have some very, very talented folks who have yet to move forward with their graduate education. That maybe they have a master's, but they may be thinking about that next, you know, the terminal degree of PhD or EDD. And I guess I'm kind of saying to you, what would be if someone is interested in what you were just talking about, but not really knowing how they may, like, why should I go to school to learn that? Or like, why should I go and get a PhD or EDD? Does that make sense? Like, like what would you say to those folks that may be considering to move forward, or and I'll even say this, even if they're white allies that may not be Black, may not be brown, but that they are so inspired by what you're saying today, whether they're still in the room or whether they watch this later, what might you say to them?
Sure. Wow. That's an amazing question, Dean Cooks. I would first say that the years are going to pass by anyway, so you may as well get your degree. Like, why not? I would also think about what you just shared at the beginning, the hope of being able to contribute to the conversation and support of your community or communities that you care about. And the one thing that I learned from the PhD, it does deepen your understanding on, and it does give you language. Like I remember, I always, when I taught high school, I always kind of centered my students no matter what. But when I read Geneva Gay's book for the first time, I came to Geneva Gay's book before I came to Gloria Latson's work. I then had the language for culturally responsive, culturally relevant teaching. So there's the beauty of constantly developing yourself and getting that deeper language for the stuff that you've always known or some of the things that you've experienced. And the other thing I learned about the PhD, it certainly doesn't make you better than anyone else, but this is what it does. It does open the door for people to listen to you, to say things that they probably would not if you didn't have 3 letters behind your name. So I call myself a scholar activist very purposefully. I recognize what TC affords, and I use it in the most positive way, that because sometimes I am at TC and I do have a doctorate, people might say, well, what's your perspective on this? That's an opportunity for me to challenge people on racism, to spread love, and to try to open up minds and hearts. So that's the functionality of my degree. And I'm
Mhm.
very clear, even coming into this space and being welcomed into this space to say the things that are most on my heart, to try to get people to think about themselves, do this archaeology of the self. If I didn't have a PhD, I may not, first of all, have met Dean Cooks and know Dr. Tanya in order to even be in this. So just think about how this whole notion of, the movie Sliding Doors, you miss that train or you get on that train, it changes your trajectory. So why not be open to a trajectory that could be full of possibility and hope? Why not take the journey?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we absolutely appreciate you taking us on a journey.
Did
Where
I
we
do
were
that, y'all? I don't know about that.
absolutely where we were able to talk about culture, to reflect on love, and to kind of project out the kind of hope that that we need in order to continue to do this work. Because I think you hit it right on the head that that if we don't have hope while we're in education, then what are we doing, right? Then what does the end actually look like, and why are we doing this work? I definitely will say this: I was unaware that you were trying to get the activity book published, and that you were going to go to NCTE. And I know you already have juice, but as the president of the Black Caucus, we should have a conversation, and we should approach Kurt in a collaborative effort. That we're already writing the volume, the two volume piece to try to
Right.
get that done. And so I'm supposed to be speaking to Kurt soon. For those of Kurt is on the editorial board, or the editor of the NCTE publishing, and maybe we can think about doing this as a collaborative effort in order to be able to move it forward. So
Oh my
see
gosh.
that's why all you got to do is talk, and when you speak it into existence, that's what family is for. So we can have that conversation, and I think that at the end of the day, this is the kind of work that needs to be in our classrooms. This is the kind of work that needs to be in our K-12 schools. We all know students that ask the question of, I learned about algebra, I learned about Pythagorean's theorem and all these other, and I learned how to write a sentence, but I didn't learn about investing. I didn't learn
Right.
about
Right.
how to buy a house. I didn't learn the skills that were going to help me as a person. And I definitely think that learning about culture, love, and hope is something that our students can greatly benefit from. So, with that, Dr. Yoli, it is always an honor and a pleasure. And I didn't mean to make you cry 3 times today, but if
Wow.
everyone can just unmute yourself, maybe turn your camera on and just say thank you, thank you, thank you. Really appreciate you. And you and I.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being a community college. The last thing I'll say, besides this being the most memorable job that I've had, 3 of my family members have gone through community college and would not have a degree without community college. And so I thank you for your work. I thank you. I thank you. I thank you. And I am leaving this room very blessed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.